Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with reference recordings. And this is going to be a controversial pick. It should be a fun discussion, I think. But I stand by my choice. We are talking about Bach's Brandenburg Concertos. Oh boy, the Brandenburgs, the ultimate piece of Baroque concerto, next to Vivaldi's The Four Seasons, of course, which actually has a role to play in this particular selection too, as you will see. The reference recording. Are you ready? Sit down, take a deep breath. The reference recording is I Musici on Philips, traditionally. And there are a lot of reasons why that's the case. This was recorded, let me see, this is from 1984. So we're talking well into the period instrument movement. And at that point, the period instrument people were screaming loudly that they were the ones who had the key to Baroque authenticity. Yes, it was them. And in the tiny, itsy-bitsy classical music ghetto, that was true. They had their following, but they were still a largish and growing cult at that point. And there were wonderful period instrument performances. Don't get me wrong. But what happened was exactly what happened with the classical music industry in general, especially in the 80s, which is a million ensembles all recorded the same stuff at the same time. So it was very difficult to accumulate a consensus. To the extent there might have been a consensus in the period instrument movement, Harnoncourt and Concentus Musicus Wien was probably the pick, but it wasn't the first or even the best of the Brandenburgs in those days, because there were earlier versions or contemporary versions with people like Leonhardt and Collegium Aurum, for example. I believe it was Collegium Aurum. Remember, it was a beautiful set. I had the LPs that came out in Pro Arte with you got the score. The manuscript score, I mean, a facsimile that you could follow along, and it was Leonhardt whose performance of the cadenza in the Fifth Concerto just turned me on to the Brandenburgs played on period instruments. I loved that recording. I didn't even own this one. I had that one, and I thought it was just, the ultimate. It was just fantastic. And Harnoncourt was still a little squeaky, creaky, although he was, I think, a bit earlier, and they were still like sort of learning their way around their fake Baroque instruments in those days. But there was Leonhardt, and there was another one that came out that was actually digital, and I adored it. It was Hans Martin Linde and the Linde Consort on EMI. It was a beautiful set of Brandenburgs. As I recall, it was beautifully recorded anyway, and I enjoyed that tremendously too. However, what taught me this one as the reference, which I got, like I said, much, much later, I wouldn't have thought about it twice, was the fact that I had friends in the business, in the actual record industry, who knew what sold and what didn't sold. And while we have to be a little bit humble here, the classical music, geeky cult people were running around arguing the respective merits of Harnoncourt and Linde and Leonhardt and all those people. The rest of the world that wanted the Bach Brandenburg Concertos and which was purchasing them based on what they heard on their local radio stations was buying this one. And the reason was because I Musici was the recognized name in Baroque music, along with Mariner and the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields and whatnot. But this set particularly was like a who's who of great instrumental playing. I mean, you got Hermann Baumann playing horn, Pina Carmarelli on violin. You've got Klaus Thunemann playing bassoon, Heinz Holliger playing the oboe. It was like every major instrumental soloist that they could get, Philips got, and they stuck them together with I Musici in top form, as they usually were, and the result was an absolutely glorious, star-studded Brandenburg that they could market the hell out of and get people to pay attention to. And so when I used to go into record shops in New York and whatnot, and I would ask when these things were coming out, the period instrument stuff, which is the one that you recommend? Which is the one that people ask for? Which is the one that you sell the most of? The answer was always I Musici on Philips. That's the reference recording. And, we shouldn't be ashamed to say it because they are incredibly musical. I mean, the musical brilliance and talent and effort that went into this is second to none. You know, it's pure snobbery and prejudice that selects the flavor of the month, authentic early music version from the same period as the reference. It wasn't. It took much more time. And by the time the period instrument movement had essentially won the argument, and chamber ensembles that played this music, even Mariner and the Academy and groups like that played Baroque music, had been effectively sidelined, because that's what happened. There were so many versions of this stuff by so many different groups. Actually, it was usually, if it was in the UK, it was the same group. They just had different names. You know, the Academy of Ancient Music, the English Consort, the Hanover Band, the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment, the Monteverdi, whatever Gardner's thing is. They were all the same people. They really were. They just changed their name and maybe switched their seats around if they were string players. They were pickup ensembles, pickup players. And one thing I Musici had, actually, was that the basic constituent ensemble of I Musici had been around for a long time and was a very, very well-established ensemble. That's one of the reasons they made such beautiful records. The same thing was true of the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields. You know, they were a regular group. And so, like any great orchestra, the fact that they all played together and had certain ensemble values and an ensemble sound and an approach, I mean, that mattered. That mattered in terms of the audible result, where some of these period instrument groups were still sounding pretty rickety back in the 80s. And so, yeah, this is it. This is the reference. You may disagree, but let me tell you, if you do listen to this, if you go back and listen to it, some of you people who grew up only with period instrument performances, I think you should be very favorably impressed by the excellence on display here in every single department. I mean, it's incredibly beautiful and cultivated and elegant, like everything Musici did. It's beautiful, a civilized recording of the Brandenburg Concerti. A gorgeous recording. And it was for many, 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 many years during that period, the reference recording. And now, of course, it's all catch as catch can. It's anybody's guess what the reference is, and it hardly matters. But there you go. The reference recording, I Musici, with a star-studded lineup of concerto soloists on what was then Philips and which is now Decca. And this, of course, is in the big I Musici box, you know, your reference recording. So put that in your pipe and smoke it, friends, and keep on listening. Thanks for joining me, and take care.